Hello Year 9, here is your first lesson on and in spectacles. Now remember, as I mentioned in the videos last week, you are now starting your GCSE curriculum in English. So an in spectacles is one of the set texts that you will do for your literature exam. We'll do it again next year, don't worry. This is just giving you a little bit of a head start. So a word that we're going to recall is ignorance. How did Dickens believe ignorance linked to Victorian society? So think back right to the start of the year when we spent that whole term looking at 19th century extracts. We looked at lots of different Dickens novels. What do we mean by ignorance, and how did Dickens feel that Victorian society were ignorant? Now, your new word is capitalism. Now, I know the independent task that I set you at the end of last week was to look in a little bit to capitalism. So just recall that and think about, are we a capitalist society? Now, just to remind you, capitalism is an economic and political system in which a country's trade and industry are controlled by private ownership rather than by the state or the government. So it's about individual business, individual wealth is all held by the individual. Okay, so if you have a product, if you sell a product, if you make money, you own your own money. So if you work hard and if you are an excellent businessman, then you get to keep the profits. Okay, nobody else. And then our want to aim higher question is, how do you think Dickens would feel about capitalism? Okay, capitalism did obviously exist in Dickens' time, but it was the rise of factories, the rise of big businesses, you know, the rise of capitalism. Think about our capitalist society today. Think about how Dickens, someone like Dickens with Dickens' beliefs, how might he feel about it? So you can pause the video now and have a go at answering these questions. So ignorance then is a really important word to understand. Being ignorant is not the same as being ill-educated or being unintelligent or being stupid. Being ignorant is simply when you don't know something. So there are all sorts of things a person might very innocently be ignorant about simply because they haven't experienced it, they haven't researched it, they just don't know. Now, where ignorance can be dangerous, though, is when people don't realise what they don't know. They think they actually know it all about something and are very happy to spout off their beliefs, but they're not really educated, they don't know what they're talking about. So how does this link to Dickens then and Priestley? And Dickens and Priestley, whilst writing 100 years apart, held very similar beliefs. So Dickens believed that the Victorian rich, the wealthy, were ignorant to the situation of the poor. They were ignorant, they thought the poor were immoral, they were poor as some sort of divine punishment for being bad, lazy people. And Dickens just knew that wasn't true. Remember, Dickens was incredibly sympathetic towards the poor, and A Christmas Carol, which is the novel we're going to be studying in September, actually, when we're all back, hopefully. A Christmas Carol is all about changing the way the rich view the poor. And Priestley, in An Inspector Calls, does something similar as well. So how are we a capitalist society? Well, we are a capitalist society, Britain most definitely. How do we know? Well, all of the wealth in this country is owned by individuals, individual corporations. The wealth is not owned or distributed by the state. The only examples we have of sort of non-capitalist institutions would be something like the NHS. So the NHS is actually a socialist entity. It's formed on socialist principles. Everyone pays their taxes to the government. The government uses this money to fund public services. And the NHS is something, you know, everyone pays into it if you pay your tax, and therefore anybody can use it. And obviously we know with all of this sort of pandemic that's going on that there's lots of talk about the NHS and rightfully praising the NHS, who are doing an incredible job under very, very difficult circumstances, because it's also no secret that the NHS is very underfunded as are most public services, including schools. The NHS simply are not getting enough money for what it is that they want to do. But at the end of the day, the NHS is free. I fell over and broke my leg during this video. I could get rushed off in an ambulance and I could go to the hospital and it wouldn't cost me a penny. And that's the example of a socialist policy, even though our country is a capitalist one. If you're already confused, it is confusing. There is nothing straightforward about capitalism, socialism, or communism. Okay, so don't worry if throughout this video you do begin to feel a little bit muddled, okay, because these are very complicated, very complex ideas. So how would Dickens feel about capitalism then? Well, remember, Dickens wasn't a very political person. He didn't hold any particular political beliefs. He was someone who wanted to change the hearts and minds of people so they were more sympathetic to the poor. Dickens would distrust and he would be wary of some of the negative sides of capitalism, and we're going to work through some of these today. So our knowledge goal today is to summarise the basic differences between socialism, capitalism, communism, and begin to apply this to an inspector course. Now, I know for your independent task, if you did it, you've got a little bit of a heads up on this, but like I said, socialism, capitalism, and communism are very, very complicated and quite controversial different political ideologies or ideas. So we're just going to try and dig a little bit deeper into what these things mean and how they link to an inspector course. So we're going to think about how these concepts influenced Priestley, who J.B. Priestley was, which again you should know a little bit of from your independent work, and why he wrote an inspector course. So I am hopefully going to show you a YouTube clip now, okay? And we're going to watch this YouTube clip together, and I may pause it just to clarify some of the ideas because it goes a little bit fast. And I just want you to make some notes thinking about how you might briefly define socialism, capitalism, and communism. What are the main issues that people associate with capitalism? What are the main issues people associate with socialism? And are there any countries that use both capitalism and socialism? Or does it have to be one or the other? Or are there countries that are successfully using both different ideology? Okay, so we're going to watch the video. Hopefully this will work, and I will talk you through it. So if this has all gone to plan, you are going to be able to see and watch this video with me. Okay, so that went very, very quickly. So as we spoke about at the start of the lesson, in a capitalist society, people say the real benefit to capitalism is that if you work hard, you get to keep the profit. So it's an incentive. If I work hard, if I try and come up with new products, new inventions, then I'm going to be rewarded for that because I will get all the profits. So it makes people work hard. It generates competition, which is good for the economy. And the economy is the wealth of a whole country, so the amount of money a country has as a whole. And obviously, the more money a country has, the generally better the lives are for the people who live in that country. Well, that's the idea anyway. But one of the biggest dangers of capitalism can be, as it said before I paused it, and what Karl Marx believed, is that actually capitalism causes a huge divide between the wealthy and the poor. Because how do those capitalists make their money? Well, they make their money through their workers, their badly paid, often exploited workers. And there is something fundamentally wrong with that to people who distrust and disagree with capitalism. So socialism, in terms of the original sort of economic idea generated by Karl Marx, is that individual companies do not exist. They do not keep their own wealth. Everything is owned by the state, by the government. Okay, so factories, businesses, railways, schools, museums, any theme parks, everything is owned by the government. So any profit goes back to the government, and any profit is then equally distributed among the people. So the idea of socialism is that what you don't have is the wealthy elite and the exploited poor. So it sounds quite nice on one level. Well, okay, no one makes an individual massive profit. Everyone gets what they need. Everyone gets an equal or fair wage. Is there anything that wrong with that? There's several problems with what we've just heard. Firstly, if everyone's paid the same, no matter what job they do, why would people want to do the more difficult, more stressful jobs, the jobs like a doctor, which requires, you know, a huge amount of years and years of dedication to being educated to be a doctor? Why would you put yourself through that when you could be the person that cleans the lab of the doctor and you are paid the same wage? Why would anybody choose to be a doctor? But people that are very pro-socialism would say, well, that doctor can't operate on somebody without that cleaner making sure that his equipment is sterile. So actually, if the doctor can't do his job without the cleaner, why would the cleaner not deserve to be paid as much as the doctor? And if that means that that cleaner can go home to a house, enough food to feed their children, a decent quality of life, then is that really a bad thing? And actually, if we're saying the only reason that human beings work hard is because they want money, does that not say something bad about human beings? Another problem with socialism is that if everything's earned by your government, what if your government's corrupt? And that is the biggest problem we have in countries who are communist or socialist, and often, more often than not, run by a dictator. So that dictator is in charge of the government, in charge of the means of distribution, in charge of the wealth of that country, in charge of distributing that wealth to the people. Well, if that dictator is just interested in their own wealth, their own power, distributing that wealth to their supporters, then suddenly you find the regular people in an even worse position than they are under capitalism. So socialism has some real problems with it as well. Okay, so we're going to keep going. So communism is actually something that has never happened. Communism is seen as the step after socialism, according to Karl Marx. So once you have a socialist society, that government then give over control of the wealth, control of the means of production over to the people, and the people as a collective own everything. So any countries that are called communist, actually what we mean is they're run as a socialist government, as a socialist economy. No country has actually ever really got to communism, where everything is owned and the power is owned by the people rather than the government or the dictator, as is often the case. So hopefully you are not thoroughly confused by that. So now I need to attempt to get the PowerPoint back up, which hopefully I can do. So hopefully you will have some notes from that clip. So I'd just like you to make some notes. I'd just like you to make some notes thinking about what have you learnt about capitalism, socialism, communism? What are the issues with capitalism? What are the issues with socialism? And think about what we heard about countries like Sweden, Denmark, Norway. How have they managed to have capitalism and communism together? Okay, or capitalism and socialism together. Okay, so you can pause the video and just make some brief notes if you haven't already. So we're not going to watch this clip together because it's quite long, but I'm going to put it in the comments of the YouTube video as a sort of optional extra if you want. So what this video does is it talks you through a little bit about the history of capitalism. So if you'd like to develop your ideas and understanding a little bit more about how capitalism started and how it's developed, you can pause the video, go and watch that clip and go and make some of your notes, okay? But that's an optional extra, or you can just move on with me. So I wanted to try and just explore the idea of capitalism a little bit more because, like I said, it is something very, very complicated. So I've come up with a slightly silly hypothetical example, okay, about a guy called Ben. So Ben has always wanted to be an entrepreneur. An entrepreneur is someone who is a businessman, basically, someone who wants to create their own business. So he decided to go to university and get a degree in business, which his parents were able to support him through financially. Ben is quite lucky. He was from not a rich, but a comfortable, you know, what we would know as a comfortable middle class family. His parents were able to support him financially through university. At university, Ben comes up with an idea for a product and uses the contacts that he's made, you know, through his tutors and through the people at the university to meet with an investor. The investor invests some money in Ben's business, and with that money, he's able to make 1,000 examples of the product. The product is really popular, sells out immediately, and the profit that Ben's made, he uses to open a small factory. That product, again, continues to sell really well. He becomes even more successful and is able to use the profits to open 5 more factories. And as you can imagine, 5 factories are creating lots and lots of product. Ben's product is successful, people continue to buy it, and Ben's personal wealth and fortune continues to accumulate. Because Ben lives in our country, it is a capitalist country, Ben gets to keep all of his profit as a result for his hard work. And after 5 years, Ben is worth £1 million. So Ben has been really successful. Now, you could argue, good for Ben. Well done, Ben. You know, you have worked hard, you've put the time and the effort in, you've built your business up. Congratulations, you deserve that £1 million. You know, you deserve to have those profits. And this is, you know, capitalism. However, we also have Jenny. Jenny has also wanted to be an entrepreneur her whole life, but she chose not to go to university because, like many, she was put off by getting in debt through having to take out a student loan. So she decided, no, university is not for me. And unfortunately for Jenny, despite her parents being really wonderful and really supportive, they didn't have the personal wealth to be able to pay for her to go to university. But Jenny, in her spare time, works away at trying to plan and come up with a product. Although unfortunately, Jenny doesn't have a lot of spare time because she works in one of Ben's factories for 40 hours a week and is paid minimum wage. So she works long hours. She doesn't make a massive amount of money for what she does because she just works in a factory. Jenny finally comes up with an idea for a product and tries to get a business loan. So she goes into her bank and tries to apply for a loan, a business loan, to make a prototype of her product that she can then take to an investor to try and get them to invest. But unfortunately, the bank refuses the loan because Jenny doesn't earn enough money and they don't think that she has enough excess income after all her bills to be able to pay it. Jenny's a really hard worker and she goes to Ben, her boss, for a small raise, which would enable her to get the loan, but Ben refuses as he would have to give all of the workers more money and therefore he would make less profit. So if he gives Jenny a small raise, then he'd have to give all of his workers a raise, and you know, he's got thousands of workers and that would put a real dent in Ben's profits. So Ben doesn't want to earn less money himself, so he refuses. And unfortunately, feeling defeated, Jenny gives up on her product and her dream because it seems like there's no help or support out there for her. And here we have one of the issues with capitalism, particularly that there are, you know, some people are very pro-capitalism, some people have concerns about capitalism. And here what we have is an example of privilege. You know, Ben was privileged to be able to go to university. He was privileged to be able to come from a family that had their own personal financial situation, meant that they could support Ben in his dream. Jenny's parents love her just as much and are just as brilliant parents, but they don't personally have the money themselves to give that support to their daughter, even if they wish they could. Jenny has to work for minimum wage, therefore Jenny is disadvantaged. And the system is stacked against Jenny. Jenny wants to try and make something better for herself. She wants to try and get out a business loan, but because Jenny doesn't earn enough money, she's not allowed that opportunity. And the biggest issue we have here is Ben himself. Now, Ben is worth, after 5 years, £1 million. £1 million is a lot of money, and that wealth is probably going to grow. Does Ben not have a moral obligation to pay his workers a fair living wage? Because minimum wage is the minimum employers can legally give to their workers. It's not necessarily enough for a person to live on, let alone live comfortably on. So does Ben not have, as Ben has the privilege, as Ben has the power, as Ben has the wealth, could Ben not do an awful lot of good for someone like Jenny and his other workers by taking slightly less profits? You could argue money he doesn't need to make the lives of Jenny and the other workers better. Now, J.B. Priestley would say Ben has a moral obligation to do that. He would say that is absolutely what Ben should do. Ben should pay his workers a fair living wage. And if Jenny had a fair living wage, then Jenny could possibly get her business loan, come up with an investor, and maybe make her dream come true. Now, this is just a very simplistic way of trying to get through to you the ideas of what capitalism is, but actually why someone like Priestley felt that capitalism was inherently unfair, that it divided people. You know, Ben and Jenny essentially had different opportunities based on their, you know, nowadays we don't talk about the class system very much, and the class system, you know, this idea of working class, middle class, upper class, it is nowhere near as strict and rigid as it used to be, you know, in the 19th and 20th century. But certainly the class system still exists. And here we have an example of Jenny and Ben being, you know, not having an equal footing with each other simply because of the wealth of their families. So hopefully that example might make it a little bit clearer. So we're going to watch another video now. And this video is going to be about J.B. Priestley. Okay, so I'm hopefully going to be able to switch screens. Here we go. Let's see if this will work. So as we listen to this video, I'd just like you to make some notes, okay, on what you learn about J.B. Priestley, what you learn about the context of an in spectacles. Okay, so there's some really important things that we learned there. Okay, so Priestley is basically wanting to advocate. Sorry, I'm trying to get the PowerPoint back up. Priestley is wanting to make people continue to change in 1946 when the play was first performed. He wanted people to think about what the country had just gone through, you know, in both world wars, and he then deliberately chose to set the play in 1912, even though people in 1946 would obviously know exactly what was going to happen between 1912 and 1946. And you'll see when we read the play that Priestley does that use of dramatic irony very, very deliberately. So really important things that hopefully you've written down about Priestley. He was a socialist and a supporter of the Labour Party, who in 1945 won their first election. He was a public broadcaster during World War II. He wrote the play in 1944 and 1945 at the end of World War II. He was against capitalism, the class system, social inequality, and he supported human rights. So these are some of the things that Priestley believed in. He was against capitalism because of the social divide that it caused, and he was an advocate for socialism. Now, I don't want you to think that Priestley wanted to overthrow the government and wanted us to have, you know, a socialist government and a really strict sort of socialist economic policy. He didn't. What he wanted was some socialist ideas to exist in our country. For example, he wanted a welfare state. Now, the welfare state is basically, again, everyone pays their taxes, and part of that taxes is used to support the vulnerable. So things like housing benefits, tax credits, job seekers allowance, etc., as we might know them, these are all an example of the welfare state. So if someone falls upon hard times, or for often supplementing people having to live on minimum wage, can apply for these state-funded benefits. Now, this is something that didn't exist in 1945, but something J.B. Priestley felt should exist. Free, good quality education available to everybody, rich or poor. This isn't something that good quality education for everyone didn't exist in 1945. Priestley thought it should. Healthcare, the NHS, didn't exist in 1945, and Priestley thought it should. So when we're talking about socialism, we're talking about those sorts of ideas. Okay, government funded, public funded initiatives that would support everyone, particularly the most vulnerable in society. These are the things that J.B. Priestley believed in. So the final thing that I'd like you to do today is just think, what message or intentions can you predict Priestley's going to convey in In Spectacles? So what sorts of ideas do you think J.B. Priestley is going to force us to confront when we read the play? What do you think his intentions are going to be? So then we're just thinking about, as a sort of final feedback, what is capitalism? Why did men like Priestley dislike it? So what is it about capitalism that Priestley would dislike? What is it about socialism that Priestley would support? So you can just add those to your notes. So finally, we have our final feedback. Why was Priestley so against capitalism? And how are Dickens' attitudes to society's ignorance similar to Priestley's? Okay, so just think about what you've learned today about why Priestley was against capitalism and how Dickens' views of the rich's ignorance to the poor might be shared by Priestley. Okay, this has been a long and it's been a very context-heavy lesson. Please don't worry if you are still a little bit confused about the idea of capitalism, these ideas of socialism. It is something that we are going to keep going over in these lessons, and as we start reading the play, we're going to go through how Priestley uses these ideas, and so hopefully over time they should make a little bit more sense. And as always, if you need any help, remember to talk or email your class teacher, okay, or me, and we will help you. Okay, see you tomorrow.